In the winter of 1945, the Second World War was grinding toward its bloody conclusion. The Allies had broken into Germany and the Reich was crumbling, but on the frozen front lines of the Netherlands, one small island became the stage of an extraordinary struggle. Capelsche Veer, a tiny piece of land in the flooded Maas River Valley, held little strategic value. Yet it would demand the lives of hundreds of soldiers before the battle was done. The Allies called the mission Operation Elephant, and it would prove how even the smallest corner of Europe could become a killing ground. The story of Operation Elephant begins months earlier, in September 1944, with Operation Market Garden. The daring Allied gamble sought to seize bridges across the Netherlands and thrust into Germany. Market Garden failed, but it left behind a long, narrow corridor of Allied territory stretching north to the city of Nijmegen. This salient was both a prize and a liability, and the Germans struck hard to cut it off. Despite repeated counterattacks, the Allies held firm. Yet the enemy succeeded in destroying the Nijmegen railway bridge. The Great Road Bridge, however, remained intact, becoming a vital artery for supplies. Determined to secure the salient, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery ordered the British Second Army to eliminate German resistance still lurking west of the River Maas. But then, on December 16th, the Germans launched their last great offensive in the Ardennes. Suddenly, every Allied plan in the Netherlands was put on hold. Attention shifted south to Belgium, where American and British forces fought to halt Hitler's desperate gamble. Still, in the frozen Dutch lowlands, one danger remained: a German stronghold on Allied territory, a small island called Capelsche Veer. And there, the battle would soon erupt. Capelsche Veer was an unlikely fortress. No more than a patchwork of farmland, dikes and flooded fields, it sat in the Maas River like an isolated tooth jutting into Allied lines. Its value was not in size, but in position. As long as German paratroopers held the island, they posed a constant threat of raids, artillery spotting, and a morale-sapping reminder that the front was not yet secure. The defenders were no ordinary troops. German Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers hardened by years of combat, had dug into the frozen soil. They built bunkers into the dikes, fortified cellars of ruined houses, and prepared machine gun nests overlooking the open approaches. Snow blanketed the island, turning the flat farmland into a deadly killing field. Any advance across those white expanses meant exposure, where even a few well-placed guns could cut down dozens. For the Allies, the foothold was intolerable. It was a dagger pointing at their flank, a pocket of resistance that refused to yield. To the Germans, it was a matter of pride. Even as the Reich collapsed elsewhere, they clung to Capelsche Veer with tenacity, determined to bleed their enemy for every inch of ground. The task of clearing Capelsche Veer first fell to the Polish 1st Armoured Division fighting under Canadian command. In late December 1944, they struck across the snow-covered fields. But the Germans were ready. Mortars rained down, machine guns swept the approaches, and within hours the Poles were forced back. Casualties were heavy, over 120 men killed or wounded in 2 failed attacks. Undeterred, the Allies tried again in mid-January. This time, it was the turn of the Royal Marines, seasoned in amphibious assaults. On January 13th, they launched Operation Horse. In freezing conditions, the Marines advanced with determination, but the island's defenders held their ground. For every yard gained, the Marines paid in blood. When the smoke cleared, 49 more Allied soldiers had become casualties, and the Germans still controlled the island. What was meant to be a swift clearing operation had turned into a costly stalemate. The Allies realized brute courage alone would not suffice. Capelsche Veer had been underestimated. Its defenders would need to be rooted out with a larger, more coordinated attack. And so the burden passed to the Canadians, who began to prepare for what they called Operation Elephant. By late January 1945, the Canadians were ready to launch their assault. The plan was ambitious. Artillery would lay down a smoke screen to blind German gunners, while infantry companies advanced from both the east and west of the island simultaneously. Tank support would follow, smashing strongpoints that had resisted earlier attacks. It was to be a hammer blow meant to crush the stubborn defenders once and for all. On the morning of January 26th, the plan went into action. Thick smoke rolled over the frozen riverbanks, shrouding the island. Through the haze, Canadian infantry began their advance, but the Germans were not blind. Paratroopers surged out of their positions in fierce counterattacks, fighting with a ferocity that shocked the Canadians. Machine gun fire tore through the smoke, and mortars rained down. After hours of bitter combat, the Canadians were forced back. By 11:30 a.m., the attack was called off. Operation Elephant had begun in failure, but the Canadians would not give up. Instead, they regrouped, brought forward heavier tanks, and prepared to hurl themselves at Capelsche Veer once more. The struggle for the island was only just beginning. On January 28th, the Canadians tried again. This time, armoured support joined the assault. Light Stuart tanks rumbled across the narrow bridge, but progress was halted almost immediately. The towering earthen dikes that ringed the island acted as natural barriers, too steep for the small tanks to climb. The infantry was left to advance largely on foot, exposed once more to mortar shells and machine gun fire. Each attempt was shattered before it could gain ground. 2 days later, heavier Sherman tanks were brought forward. 2 successfully crossed the bridge, while 3 more were ferried onto the island's western edge. At first, this seemed like the breakthrough. But then, nature turned against the attackers. The weather warmed, the frozen ground softened into a sucking mire. The fields of Capelsche Veer became a swamp of mud. The Shermans churned forward but quickly bogged down, their great tracks spinning helplessly. Some were stuck fast, unable to move at all. For the infantry slogging beside them, every step was exhausting. They waded through mud, slipping, sinking, while German shells burst overhead. Even with tank guns thundering in support, progress was painfully slow. Only one objective, codenamed Grapes, was captured. Another, Raspberry, still stood defiant. Raspberry was little more than a fortified position on the island, but to the Germans, it became their final stronghold. To the Canadians, it was an immovable obstacle. Attack after attack was thrown against it. Each time, German mortars blanketed the approaches, while machine gun fire cut down men in the open. For the Canadians, the assault was a nightmare of mud, wire, and fire. On January 30th, 2 Sherman tanks rolled into position and unleashed their cannons against Raspberry's defences. Behind them, waves of infantry surged forward, but as they closed in, German guns opened up once more. The attackers were cut down before they could reach their objective. A second attempt fared no better, with casualties mounting. Exhaustion and frustration spread through the ranks. Then came a third attack. This time, 4 Shermans poured fire into the strongpoint, pounding it without mercy. When the guns fell silent, Canadian infantry fixed bayonets and charged through the smoke. In vicious hand-to-hand combat, bayonet against rifle butt, grenade against bunker, they stormed Raspberry. The strongpoint finally fell. But victory came at terrible cost. The men were bloodied and drained, their strength spent. Beyond Raspberry, the advance stalled once more. By January 31st, the Canadians had secured most of the island. East and west attacking forces finally linked up, and it seemed the battle for Capelsche Veer was won. But when they pushed forward to finish the fight, they found the positions empty. Under cover of night, the German paratroopers had withdrawn across the river, slipping away quietly, leaving their dead and shattered defences behind. The cost of victory was staggering. The Germans had lost 64 men killed or wounded, with 34 taken prisoner. For the Allies, the toll was far heavier. The Canadians suffered 133 casualties. The Poles and Royal Marines in their earlier failed attacks had lost another 231. In total, 364 Allied soldiers had been killed or wounded to capture an island barely 2 kilometers long. In the grand scale of the Second World War, Operation Elephant was a minor action. It would not change the outcome of the war, nor shift the front lines in dramatic fashion, yet for the men who fought and died there, it was everything. Today, the island lies quiet, its fields green and peaceful, but beneath the soil lingers the memory of those bitter days when Capelsche Veer became a frozen hell.